In 1940, the Germans conquered France and most of Europe. The Second World War had begun. 2 years before the Americans entered the war, Britain was on its own. Desperate, they struck back at the Germans in one of the few ways they could, by creating a secret organization, the Special Operations Executive, the SOE.
The mission of SOE was not to gather intelligence. It wasn't an espionage outfit. It was, quote, to set Europe ablaze. It was to carry out sabotage, blow up trains, blow up boats, canals, railroads, to make contact with resistance groups in occupied Europe, which could then be supplied from Britain.
In the early hours of June the 17th, 1943, an RAF plane secretly landed in Nazi-occupied France. On board was a princess from a titled Indian family. She was also a British spy. Young, beautiful, and codenamed Madeleine, her assignment was described as
the principal and most dangerous post in France.
Her skills as a wireless operator would provide a vital link between Paris and London. In a city controlled by the Nazis, her life expectancy was just 6 weeks. Noor Inayat Khan was an unlikely secret agent. In training, her instructors described her as
clumsy, easily flustered, and pretty scared of weapons.
But her conspicuous courage in extreme danger would earn her the George Cross, one of only 3 awarded to women in World War II.
She saw that the Second World War presented an existential challenge. It became the overriding moment of truth.
She faced the greatest evil in all of human history. Could she survive?
Descended from Indian royalty, the overriding influence throughout her life were the teachings of her pacifist Sufi father. Noor was born in the shadows of the Kremlin in January 1914, where her father, a Sufi mystic, was teaching at the imperial court. Her mother, Aura Ray Baker, was an American who had fled her own family to marry Noor's father.
They named her Noor Inayat, meaning light among women, and she would become the light of her father's heart.
She was, from the very start, as a young child, she was very generous and self-sacrificing. And she was always concerned more about others than about herself.
When Noor was 8, the family moved to Paris, into a house given to them by a wealthy devotee of her father. It was called Fazl Manzil, the House of Blessings.
Well, I grew up in this house, and it was very obvious that it was a family home on the one side. Even in the days of Noor's childhood here with her parents, it was a family home, but at the same time, it was a place for her father to receive his followers, to give talks, to give classes, to hold meetings.
One of Hazrat's students from the Netherlands painted a series of watercolors depicting life at Noor's home. Surrounded by her father's students from all over Europe, Noor felt deeply part of the larger whole, regardless of skin color, religion, or nationality.
Primarily it was a path of service, service to the poor, service to those in need, and a call to remember God.
Even as a child, Noor was drawn to this path of service, one she would follow as she grew up.
Harsh reality was to intrude on Noor's idyllic childhood, when ill health led to her father's death when she was just 13.
So his loss, his absence, was an extraordinary loss. It was like this brilliant sun had been shining over everything and then suddenly departed.
When Noor's father died, she was very young. She was a young teenager at the time and took on a role of mothering her siblings because her mother had fallen into a state of deep depression which lasted for years.
Noor was academically gifted, writing poetry and stories, and she would later study child psychology at the Sorbonne. But Noor's real passion was music, the harp being her favorite instrument. Noor also wrote for children, her stories appearing in the Paris newspapers and on French radio. By the age of 25, her book, 20 Gattaca Tales, had been published in France, Britain, and America. But Noor's pursuit of artistic endeavors was about to be brought to an abrupt halt. On May the 10th, 1940, German troops invaded the Low Countries and swept into France. Like millions of others across Europe, Noor's life was to change irrevocably. On June the 14th, the invading German army reached Paris. Along with thousands of other refugees, the family struggled west via Tours, eventually reaching Bordeaux. Noor and the rest of the family managed to get on board the last boat of British refugees. And on the morning of June the 22nd, their ship docked at the Cornish port of Falmouth. Having reached the relative safety of England, Noor and her younger brother, Vilayat, decided to join the British fight against the Nazis. Vilayat joined the Royal Navy, working on minesweepers, while Noor joined the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAAF, to be trained as a wireless operator, choosing the name Nora Baker to better fit into her new British life. 2 years later, in 1942, Noor, now a leading aircraftswoman, was approached and invited for an interview. It came from this building in Baker Street, the headquarters of SOE. The Morse code skills that she had learnt in the Air Force made her the ideal candidate for a wireless operator. She would send encrypted messages back to London. This was the most dangerous role in SOE, with a life expectancy of just 6 weeks. On the 29th of February 1943, Noor embarked on 3 months of intensive training as a secret agent. She was taught how to survive in enemy territory, how to use weapons and explosives, and how to resist interrogation and torture.
Surviving War Office documents describe Noor as emotional and imaginative. Her superiors remarked on her selfless dedication.
The motive for her accepting the present task is apparently idealism.
Noor's instructors saw this uncommon idealism as a distraction. But her skill on the radio was unquestioned. SOE radio operators were desperately needed in France. While Noor excelled at operating the radio, she often lost focus when coding and uncoding the wireless messages. The head of SOE France was Maurice Buckmaster. He needed every radio operator available.
Get me Marx.
Leo Marx was the head of communications at SOE, the chief cryptologist, and a genius of codes and secret messages.
I want you to look into the background of this trainee.
For Buckmaster, Marx was Noor's last best hope. For some reason, Noor struggled with her coding, and Marx would have to find out why.
I've read in your evaluations that you refuse to lie. That's very noble.
It was my father's greatest lesson.
But when you fail to encode a message correctly, you have lied.
What?
When you fail to encode a message correctly, people will die. The message will not get through. You must tell the truth.
This provided the focus she needed, the grounding in the real challenges she would face. Marx watched as her technique began to improve. Each time Noor finished encoding a line, she closed her eyes and ran her finger over the phrase, as if saying a prayer, tapping into a resource no other agent had. And when she was done, her work was perfect. There was one final task. Marx must give Noor a bluff check, a secret signal by which they would know that she had been captured and that the Germans, not Noor, were using her radio.
All you need to do is remember to never use a key phrase with 18 letters in it. Any other number, but not 18.
Once in Paris, she would adopt an entirely new identity, that of a French children's nurse named Jeanne-Marie Renier. But to London, Noor would be known by her code name, Madeleine, radio operator for the Prosper Network, the largest and most important SOE group in France.
On the night of the 16th of June, 1943, along with fellow SOE agent Diana Rowden, Noor was secretly flown from Tangmere in Sussex to an isolated field in the Loire Valley. She was already in extreme danger.
She arrived eventually by Lysander, not knowing that the man who organized the Lysander operations was a double agent.
The double agent who met her aircraft was Henri Dericourt. His actions would have devastating effects on the SOE network in France.
He didn't betray Noor, but he didn't take any particular steps to make sure that she was all right. She used such sense as she had to make sure that she wasn't tracked, and got away, apparently untraced, to Paris.
3 years after she had fled the city, Noor found herself back in a Paris now dominated by the German military. Her mission was to join a secret SOE network called Prosper, where she would work as a wireless operator for locally recruited agent Henri Gary. Within days of her arrival, Noor secretly began to transmit vital information back to London. To avoid detection, she was constantly on the move. Hidden in her suitcase, her radio went everywhere with her. In Paris, within a week of Noor arriving, the double agent Dericourt's treachery had led the Gestapo to arrest almost the entire Prosper network. Noor was now one of the last wireless operators still operating in the city. Head of SOE's French section, Maurice Buckmaster, offered Noor a route to safety on one of their flights out of France. Realizing her significance, Noor refused.
Buckmaster left her out there because she was the only radio link with London after the collapse of the circuit. He needed Noor. She became very, very important to him.
But Baker Street weren't the only people listening for Noor's transmissions. With the arrest of the other SOE wireless operators, the Germans could concentrate all their efforts on the one wireless still transmitting from Paris.
She then ran around Paris while the Gestapo was swooping on every other single member of the circuit for a good 2 months without being caught. It would appear that she survived through a mixture of luck and sheer cunning and quick-wittedness.
For all her time in Paris, Noor had never returned to her childhood home. But now, exhausted and alone, she returned to Suresnes, her old neighborhood, calling upon a family friend. It was a desperate and dangerous choice.
Agents were trained not to go anywhere near people who might know who they really were, because it was felt that that could be very dangerous and draw attention to them.
Noor's new life met her old, as she strung her radio antenna in a place so close to her family home.
Maybe it was just a way of gaining some kind of inner strength to just see the place where her father and her mother had lived, where she had grown up and known maybe happier times.
Weeks passed, and Noor grew accustomed to exhaustion, as she and her radio were always on the move.
And then the constant threat, the realization that every time your finger hits that key, it's not just the people in England who are hearing it. It's Germans too, and they're just trying to find you, and eventually they will.
Noor had now been transmitting for more than 12 weeks, over twice the 6-week life expectancy of a wireless operator. Against all odds, she continued to evade the Gestapo, but was on borrowed time. The bitter irony of her eventual capture was that it was an act of betrayal rather than the diligence of the German forces.
Avenue Foch?
As the resistance became more organised and the Germans were getting more aware that this was going on, they started to offer money for people to denounce people.
Yeah.
Noor was actually portrayed by a woman called Reich, who was the sister of the man who ran the organisation, the circuit that she belonged to. There would appear to be a sense of kind of jealousy and resentment. Noor was very glamorous, attractive woman.
René Gary was paid 100,000 French francs. The Gestapo would have paid considerably more for this information.
The informant identified Noor's last secure apartment.
Shoot!
On October 13th, 1943, after working in Paris as an SOE agent for 4 months, Noor Inayat Khan was arrested.
The Gestapo chief at Avenue Foch was a very plausible character who was called Hans Kiefer, who knew how to win round the male agents. And he won their confidence and he put them at their ease and then he got them to talk. Noor never fell for that.
2 weeks later, SOE once again began to pick up signals from Noor's transmitter. The message indicated that she was having problems. But observers back at the receiving station noted something odd. On this signal, Noor's all-important bluff security check was omitted. In fact, it was the Germans who were using Noor's captured radio to send fake messages to SOE in the hope that London would impart important information in their replies. But in captivity, Noor was now exasperating her captors and revealing nothing under interrogation. In a sworn statement after the war, Hans Kiefer, head of the Gestapo, said,
Madeleine, after her capture, showed great courage, and we got no information whatsoever out of her.
Noor had made an escape attempt from her cells here, onto the roof of 84 Avenue Foch. Kiefer had had enough, and at the end of November 1943, after threatening to shoot her, he ordered her removal from Paris.
Noor was sent by train to Pforzheim prison in Germany.
But more disturbing was the evidence that Noor had been tortured.
Her hands and feet were chained. I could hear the blows she received. She suffered much.
Finally, after almost a year in captivity, Noor was taken to Dachau, the concentration camp where thousands of Jews, political prisoners, and others considered an enemy of the Reich.
So she, of course, feared death. Every human being fears death, and no doubt she feared more than death the horrors of the brutality of the Gestapo. She came face to face with the very worst of reality, the worst of the world in which we live. How did she survive it? How did she make her way through? It speaks of a level of faith, of resilience, of trust in the divine beneficence.
The only word she said before Rupert shot her from behind was liberty.
Her message was that the human soul is of the divine source, that every human being is sacrosanct, that all people must be free, and that if it requires the sacrifice of one's own life, then that commonwealth of humanity deserves such a sacrifice.